Hello and welcome to Food with Flick. So tonight's topic we are going to be looking at one of my favorite subjects, which is carbohydrates. So carbohydrates can be a very complex topic. It can cause a lot of confusion. There is a lot of misinformation spread out there. There's a lot of conflicting information and it can be very hard to know what's right for you when it comes to carb consumption and even what they are. So hopefully I'm going to clear a little bit of that up for you tonight. So when most people think of carbohydrates, they generally think of things like bread, pasta, rice, potatoes, those sorts of things that are quite heavy in carbohydrates. And this is true. This is all of those things that I mentioned do have high carbohydrates, especially in comparison to the other macronutrients that they have. When we're thinking about carbohydrates, though, it's important to know that most of our other plant food is also carbohydrates. So things like broccoli, salad, all our fruits and veg, all of that is carbohydrate sources. So a lot of people have this negative association with carbohydrates because they think of excess energy, processed foods, sugars, so things that are going to give us an excess body fat and bad health. But carbohydrates will actually give us our health and our vitality and give us the body shape that we need in the recovery from exercise if we're consuming them in the right way. So it's important that we have an understanding of what carbohydrates are and to have that positive relationship with them so that we can use them rather than fear them. So when we're looking at carbohydrates, it is our preferred energy source for our body and our brain. So it's important that we have a lot coming in and that we have a little bit stored as well. We don't tend to store much carbohydrates. We tend to store fat quite well. Protein is stored in our muscles and whatnot, but carbohydrates is basically stored as glycogen, glucose, and we don't store a lot of it. So it's important that we have continuous amounts of carbohydrates coming in, but we want to be cautious that we're not over consuming because it does get turned to other excess energy. So when we're looking at carbohydrates, they talk about the minimum that we want to be consuming per person to stay out of ketosis. So ketosis is when you're dropping your carbohydrates so low that your body will then choose to run off fat instead of carbohydrates. And we want to be looking at 180 grams of carbohydrates a day to prevent ketosis. Now, our body can make up to 130 grams of carbohydrates a day not coming from carbohydrates. So basically that's where ketosis and other energy sources come into it. But we want to be cautious that we're not doing this too regularly. And obviously there is still a deficit there, so we still have to have some carbohydrates coming in. So it's really important that when we're looking at carbohydrates, we're looking at consuming them in the right way, and that we're looking at our energy and how we're functioning and how we're feeling as well. Because if we're not feeling amazing over the whole day, if we don't have sustained energy, if we're feeling like we're getting that, sugary high and crash and that we're waking up tired and that we're not performing well in our exercise and even daily activities, or even simply thinking clearly and easily, or we're having a bit of that fog and a bit of a brain fog, then we may be not taking in as many carbohydrates as what we need to be. So we want to make sure that we're getting a wide variety of carbohydrates as well. So like I was talking about earlier, carbohydrates gives us our vitality and our health. So, many nutrients, many antioxidants, all of those things, they're all coming from our plant foods, our carbohydrates. So it's really important that we're looking at a wide variety of colors and different types. So different types of carbohydrates and different colors will have different macro and micronutrients in them, and it's really important that we're consuming a little bit of each to get a wide variety in our diet so that we're not missing out on certain things and so that we're getting optimal health as well. Now, when it comes to carbohydrate consumption, a lot of people, like I said, are a little bit scared of having those what I call higher energy carbs, which is things like your breads, your pastas, all the carbohydrates that most people sort of think about when they think of carbohydrates. Now, we can actually use these carbohydrates to assist us with our recovery from training. So if you're doing a heavy training session, whether it be lifting weights and breaking down muscle, or doing high intensity cardiovascular exercise where you're depleting your glycogen levels, then we can use carbohydrates to help us with that replenishment, basically. So it helps our body repair and recover from that exercise session without adding fat stores later on. So basically your body will utilize all of that. So when we're doing our exercise, basically it creates this metabolic window where we can consume a little bit more calories, and our body will actually utilize it instead of store it like it usually would at other times. So pretty exciting to understand that, and to understand that we can then teach our body to have more of a consumption of calories and increase our metabolic rate. Rather than just sticking to, whatever our metabolism is sitting at the moment. Unless you've got a super high metabolism, you might want to slow it down. Sometimes I feel that way myself when I feel like I consume a massive amount of food. But anyway, so the other thing a lot of people don't realize is that fiber is a carbohydrate. So fiber is a type of carbohydrate that we don't actually absorb fully. So it basically gets eaten by the bacteria in our intestines once we don't consume it, once we don't absorb it. So this can be why a lot of people have a lot of IBS type symptoms when they have too much of it. So we want to be cautious that we're introducing it slowly, but this is very important to assist us with healthy gut health, and for a feeling of feeling full without having excess calories, especially when we're looking at our body composition and other health issues associated with extra fat. So this sort of thing can be very helpful to consume, but a lot of people don't really think of fiber when they think of carbohydrates. So it's important to understand that fiber is a carbohydrate and that we really need to include that in our diet. When we're looking at carbohydrates, a lot of people think of the glycemic index, which is basically how much it spikes your insulin levels when you consume a food. They don't always take into consideration the glycemic load. So basically, when I'm teaching my clients about what type of carbohydrates to be consuming on a regular basis, and then the ones to sort of stick to around training times, what I like to teach them is that with carbohydrates that are high glycemic index, high glycemic load, we want to be thinking about really how much of a food are we going to consume for it to spike our insulin levels. So for an example, when you're looking at something like watermelon, it might have a really high glycemic index. However, when you're looking at the amount that you need to consume for that level to spike, it's probably not going to happen. So watermelon is not such a bad thing to have at normal times, rather than only sticking to your training sessions with them around your metabolic window. Sorry, excuse me. So looking at the glycemic index as well as glycemic load is really important when we're looking at carbohydrates. So no need to fear a lot of carbohydrates like, a lot of people do. A lot of people have this terrible association with carbohydrates, when really it's going to give us our energy, our vitality, our recovery for our exercise and for the next session as well, so that you actually get that good relationship with exercise. I've been to a point where I have under-eaten and under-recovered for my training sessions, and it got to a point where training was really hard, and I've never been like that, but just from dropping the carbohydrate intake too low, I felt terrible. So it's really important that we're making sure that we're feeling amazing too. So how's your energy over the day? You're getting that 3 o'clock slump, are you waking up tired? All those sorts of things can be related to carbohydrates and other food, obviously other factors as well. Sometimes we don't have a choice if we're not getting sleep for whatever reason it is, but all these things need to be taken into consideration. Is this happening all the time, or is it just a once-off that you're not feeling so great? So a lot of people get confused with artificial sweeteners. So basically with artificial sweeteners, they basically are so sweet that you only need a small amount in comparison to other sugars. So, that is why we can have a sweet drink and for it to not have so many calories in it. But it can be seen as a bit of a foreign thing for the body. It's not quite an alcohol, it's not quite a sugar, most of the ones that they use. So the body can be a little bit confused about what it is, and a lot of people get a little bit scared about that. And there has been studies shown to associate that with cancer in rats and that sort of thing as well. So we do want to be really cautious with that. And the other thing that a lot of people don't realize is that with carbohydrates can come a fair few intolerances. So when you look at things like lactose is an actual sugar. And most people don't realize that, with the intolerances with things like lactose and other carbohydrates, that it can be really affecting your digestion, and in particular things like your IBS symptoms. So when you're looking at something like a packet of gum or, the sugar-free mints, which have those artificial sweeteners in them, you'll notice on the label it has may cause a laxative effect. So this is because it can be very hard for people to basically break those carbohydrates down. So they basically have intolerances to certain levels of them. So we really want to make sure that we're not over consuming them and having a lot of them in our diet, because it can cause digestion issues and other issues. And a lot of people don't realize when they are having those sorts of things that it is actually things that your body has to get rid of. Like whatever you put in your mouth, your body is having to get rid of that. So even things like gum and mints and all those sorts of things, even though they sort of seem harmless and sugar-free, they can be affecting your digestion and those sorts of things as well. So just talking on digestion, our digestion starts in the mouth. There is a lot of enzymes that help us start to break carbohydrates and other food as well down. So it's important that we're taking our time to chew our food. And if you've got digestion issues, then you might want to start with that and see if anything improves. So with labels, it can be very confusing because, you look at the back of the label and you think, what am I looking at here? A lot of people just go by sugars, a lot of people go by carbohydrates, a lot of people go by ingredients at the top. So when we're looking at things like the total sugar content in a packet, it can be really misleading, because if they've got some sort of plant or fruit product in the product itself, then it is going to have some sugars. If not, then it might be processed and replaced with something that might be like an artificial sweetener or something like that. So it can be a little bit misleading when we're looking at just the macronutrient content or the sugar list on the back of the packet. So it's really a good idea to have a look at what the actual ingredients are. So in Australia, people have to label, or companies, have to label the ingredients in the food, and the majority of so basically they have to list the ingredients so that the first ingredient is what the product has most of it in. So if you're looking at a packet and sugar is the first three ingredients, then it may not be the best choice for you, unless it is some sort of sugar product, like a maple syrup or something like that. Then obviously you would hope that does have some sort of sugar in it. But yeah, so basically we're looking at, the ingredients, not just the macronutrient breakdown when we're looking at a packet, and hopefully that gives you a bit more of a indication of how to read labels. With things like fruit, if fruit had labels, so a lot of people don't have issues eating, some people do. A lot of people, know that fruit can be very good for you and that it's not something to avoid. But if you were looking at something like a banana, the labeling that would need would have different labels at different times because of the different sugar content in it once it ripens. So when it's green, it's going to have a different sugar content to when it ripens. So sometimes we fear those labels and stay away from things like sugar and other things on packets because we're not really understanding exactly what we're looking at. So it's really important to just think about that, think about what are you actually consuming, what is it meant to have in it, and Obviously, the less processed generally is better. If you can have more whole foods and naturally sourced foods, then chances are you're going to be getting a healthier version of what you would be in a packet. We're pretty lucky with what we have available to us in this country, so that's nice to take advantage of that. So I hope that has helped a little bit. I hope that your view on carbohydrates isn't as confused as what you might have been. So when you hear information that comes out about carbohydrates, it's important to understand whether you're getting the full story or whether you're just getting snippets of it, and whether that applies for you as well. So like I was talking about with ketosis, it's become quite a fad at the moment, and a lot of people are seeing body shape composition changes on ketosis, and claiming that they feel amazing and this, that, and the other, and that might not be the best thing for you, especially if you're wanting to continue training on your body's preference of fuel source, which is carbohydrates. So just be aware, and be aware also that sometimes when you take foods out of your diet, it can be very hard to digest them like you used to, because the enzymes and whatnot tend to not be as strong when you're implementing them back in. So be cautious of that, and just really have a think and analyze what is right for you. How is your body feeling? Is your digestion changing for the better or for the worse? All of those things come into play when we're looking at what is right for you. So I'd love to hear how you go. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. Otherwise, I'll speak to you soon.